Picture this. A scrawny, failed art student sits on a park bench in Vienna, clutching a rejection letter from the Academy of Fine Arts. His hands shake with rage as he reads the words that will haunt him forever. Your talent is insufficient. This 20-year-old nobody has just been told his dreams are worthless. His artistic vision means nothing. What this young man doesn't know is that his personal humiliation will transform into humanity's greatest nightmare. In just 15 years, this rejected artist will command the loyalty of 80 million Germans. He'll build a war machine so powerful it will conquer most of Europe. And his twisted vision will replace paintbrushes with poison gas, canvases with concentration camps. This is the story of how one man's individual failure became the world's collective tragedy, how personal resentment grew into industrial genocide, how a single no in an admissions office echoed into the screams of millions. If you're just joining the story arc, you're about to witness the most dangerous transformation in human history. Because sometimes, the most ordinary beginnings lead to the most extraordinary evil. The making of a monster. Let me take you back to 1907 to understand how a nobody became the world's most infamous somebody. Adolf Hitler wasn't born a monster. He was created by a series of failures, rejections, and twisted ideas that would fester in his mind like an infected wound. I often think about what might have happened if that art academy had just said yes. Would 6 million Jews have lived? Would 50 million people have avoided death? Would the world have been spared its darkest chapter? But they said no, and that rejection planted the first seed of a hatred that would consume the globe. Hitler's early life was a masterclass in disappointment. His father, Alois, was a brutal customs official who wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. But young Adolf dreamed of being an artist, of creating beauty and meaning. The world thought this was just typical teenage rebellion. Instead, it was the birth of a personality that could never accept being told what to do. The Vienna years, where hatred was born. After his father's death, Hitler moved to Vienna with grand dreams and his mother's savings. He was going to study art, become famous, live the bohemian life. But Vienna had other plans for him. The cosmopolitan city, filled with Jews, immigrants, and liberal ideas, both fascinated and repulsed him. Hitler thought he was witnessing the decay of pure German culture. Walking through Vienna's diverse streets, he began to blame his personal failures on the people around him. Couldn't get into art school? It must be because Jewish professors were conspiring against pure German talent. Couldn't make money selling paintings? It must be because Jewish art dealers controlled the market. The tragedy was that Vienna was actually one of the most culturally rich cities in human history. While Hitler was nursing his grievances in cheap hostels, Freud was revolutionizing psychology, Einstein was developing his theories, and artists were creating movements that would define modern culture. Hitler was surrounded by genius and learned only to hate it. World War I. The making of a fanatic. Then came 1914, and with it, the war we explored in our last episode about that fateful assassination in Sarajevo. For Hitler, World War I wasn't a tragedy. It was salvation. Finally, his life had purpose. Finally, he belonged to something greater than himself. Hitler later wrote that the war gave him the first happy days of his life. While millions died in the trenches, this failed artist found his calling as a messenger runner, dodging bullets and breathing poison gas. He was wounded twice, temporarily blinded, but he loved every minute of it. Then came November 1918. Germany surrendered. The war was over. And for Hitler, lying in a hospital bed, blind from gas poisoning, the world had betrayed him again. He'd found his purpose, his home, his identity, and it was being torn away from him. But here's what made Hitler different from the millions of other disappointed veterans. He refused to accept defeat. Most people thought, we lost. Time to rebuild. Hitler thought, we were stabbed in the back. Time for revenge. The birth of a movement. The world thought Germany in 1919 was too civilized, too educated, too cultured to fall for extremism. They were wrong. Economic collapse, political chaos, and national humiliation created the perfect breeding ground for Hitler's message of resentment and revenge. Hitler discovered he had one talent the Art Academy couldn't measure. He could speak, not just talk, but hypnotize crowds with words. In the beer halls of Munich, this failed artist found his true medium. Instead of painting on canvas, he painted dreams and nightmares in people's minds. I've listened to recordings of his early speeches, and there's something genuinely terrifying about them. He doesn't sound like the screaming madman we remember from later footage. He sounds reasonable, logical, even sympathetic. He talks about unfairness, about being ignored, about deserving better. He makes people feel like their failures aren't their fault. The 1923 Beer Hall Putsch. Learning from failure. Then Hitler made his first big mistake. Or what seemed like a mistake at the time. In November 1923, he tried to overthrow the Bavarian government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The plan was simple: storm a political meeting, declare a revolution, march on Berlin. It failed spectacularly. Police opened fire. 16 Nazis died. Hitler fled, was captured, and put on trial for treason. The world thought his political career was over before it had really begun. We thought wrong. Hitler turned his trial into a platform, his failure into a victory. He used the courtroom as a stage, portraying himself as a patriot fighting for Germany's soul. The judges, secretly sympathetic to his message, gave him the minimum sentence, 5 years in prison, of which he'd served less than 1. Prison, the dangerous education. Landsberg prison became Hitler's university. Instead of breaking him, imprisonment gave him time to think, to plan, to write. I often wonder what would have happened if they'd just executed him after the putsch. Instead, they gave him comfortable quarters, unlimited visitors, and all the time in the world to develop his twisted philosophy. It was in that prison cell that Hitler began writing Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Part autobiography, part political manifesto, part racist rant, it laid out his entire worldview. The book was rambling, repetitive, and poorly written, but it contained the blueprint for everything that would follow. The world dismissed Mein Kampf as the ravings of a failed politician. Big mistake. Hitler had written down exactly what he planned to do: eliminate the Jews, conquer Eastern Europe, establish a 1,000-year Reich. He wasn't hiding his intentions, he was advertising them. The long road to power. When Hitler got out of prison in 1924, we thought he'd learned his lesson. No more violent coups. He'd work within the system. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous. The man who couldn't be stopped by bullets would be unstoppable with ballots. The Nazi Party grew slowly at first. In the prosperous mid-1920s, Germans weren't interested in extremism. But Hitler was patient. He traveled the country, giving speech after speech, building an organization, waiting for his moment. That moment came in 1929 with the Great Depression. Suddenly, 6 million Germans were unemployed. Suddenly, democracy seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. Suddenly, Hitler's message of simple solutions to complex problems started sounding reasonable. The seduction of a nation. Here's what's truly terrifying about Hitler's rise. It was democratic. He didn't seize power. The German people gave it to him. In 1932, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the German parliament. Respectable politicians thought they could use Hitler, control him, manipulate him for their own purposes. They thought they were dealing with a useful idiot, a crude populist they could handle. Instead, they were dealing with a political genius who understood something they didn't, that in times of crisis, people don't want complexity. They want certainty. They don't want nuance. They want someone to blame. On January 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. The failed art student, the rejected nobody, the Vienna vagrant, had become the leader of Europe's most powerful nation. The world thought this was temporary, that the responsibilities of power would moderate him, that the German people would come to their senses. Instead, within months, Hitler had eliminated his political opponents, suspended civil liberties, and begun building the machinery of genocide. The lesson for today. Standing here nearly a century later, I think about that young man on the park bench, clutching his rejection letter. What if someone had reached out to him? What if his art had been accepted? What if his resentments had been addressed instead of allowed to fester? But here's the real lesson for those of us watching the story arc unfold. Hitler's rise wasn't inevitable. At dozens of points along the way, different decisions by different people could have changed everything. The art professors who rejected him, the politicians who thought they could use him, the citizens who voted for him, all made choices that seemed reasonable at the time. The world thought it was too civilized, too educated, too advanced for someone like Hitler to succeed. We were wrong, and that's a lesson we can never afford to forget. Because the conditions that created Hitler, economic despair, political chaos, social resentment, didn't die with him in 1945. As we continue our journey through the story arc, remember this: the distance between civilization and barbarism is shorter than we think. And sometimes, all it takes is one rejected art student with a talent for making people believe their problems are someone else's fault. Next week, we'll see what happened when this failed artist finally got his hands on real power, and why the world would never be the same. Because if you think Hitler's rise was terrifying, wait until you see what he did with that power. The story arc continues, and the worst is yet to come.